2 hours before my trip overseas, as I was folding the last of my clothes on the bed, I saw my husband's phone vibrate on the nightstand. The screen lit up on its own with the notification. It wasn't for me. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. The message from my daughter-in-law was all too clear before my tired eyes. When the old woman leaves, let me know. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands went cold. For a second, the world went silent. The old woman. Me. That word cut through my 64 years like a steel wire. My own daughter-in-law, speaking of me as if I were an object to be moved out of the way. My husband, Robert, walked into the room right after, smiling, as if nothing had happened. He asked if I had my passport ready, if I wanted him to take me to the airport later. I hugged him, a hug that was too long, too fake. I felt his heart beating calmly against mine, as if it were hiding something monstrous inside an ordinary chest. I kissed his cheek, disguised my trembling voice, and said I needed to take a shower before leaving. He smiled and left the room. It was then that I made the decision that saved my life. I waited a few seconds, closed the door carefully, and squeezed myself into the wardrobe, pushing clothes aside, crushing my body between old dresses, boxes, and the stuffy smell of mothballs. My heart was beating so hard I was sure they could hear it. I stayed there, motionless, in the dark, my breath short, waiting. Minutes later, I heard footsteps. The bedroom door opened, and I understood that my trip was never really meant to happen. But before we continue, I want to extend a special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps me know you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment below with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. From the darkness of the wardrobe, I saw the crack of the door open once more. I recognized my husband's footsteps. Then, another sound, lighter, more hurried. My daughter-in-law, Chloe. My stomach turned. I could only see shadows cut by the faint light of the bedside lamp. "Is she gone yet?" she asked, her voice low, nervous. "Not yet, but she's saying goodbye to her suitcases," he replied. "In half an hour, tops, she'll be gone." My blood ran cold. They spoke of me like a package that needed to be removed from the house. She approached the bed. I felt the mattress dip slightly. From the darkness where I was, I could only see her feet, the thin heel of her shoe touching the rug like a needle. "We can't mess this up now," she said. "Is everything ready?" "It is. As soon as she leaves, I'll let you know. You come in after. No one will suspect a thing. And the money? It's all organized. Power of attorney, accounts, documents. She trusts me with everything." When he said the word trusts, something inside me broke for good. My hands started to sweat. I felt the darkness closing in, the air thinning, my knees aching, but I couldn't move. Any noise would give me away. "What if she changes her mind about the trip?" Chloe asked. "She won't," he answered confidently. "She's been dreaming about this trip for years. She's always been too predictable." Predictable. The word echoed like a verdict. Yes, I had always been predictable, always trusted, always believed in my husband, my son, my daughter-in-law. I was always the silent foundation of the family. Now, that same predictability was being used against me. They were silent for a few minutes. I could only hear their breathing and the distant hum of a car passing on the street. Then I heard the sound of a purse being opened. "It's here," she said. "What you asked for." I heard the unmistakable clinking of small vials. "You don't need all that," he murmured. "Yes, we do. I don't want any room for error," she replied coldly. "After the old woman is out of the picture, there can be no coming back." I felt the urge to vomit. The phrase "out of the picture" sounded far too permanent. It wasn't just about money. There was something darker in that conversation. "Are you sure about what you're doing?" my husband asked in a rare moment of hesitation. She laughed, a humorless laugh. Too late for doubts. I heard her stand up again. Let me know as soon as she's really gone. I'll be nearby. Her footsteps moved away. The bedroom door opened and closed again. The silence returned, heavy, almost solid. My husband stayed there for a few more seconds, then left too. I remained huddled inside the wardrobe for long minutes. My legs were numb, my back ached, my heart felt like it would leap out of my chest. I only managed to get out when I was sure I was alone. I staggered to the bed and sat down. My hands were shaking so much I could barely get my phone from my purse. This wasn't just marital infidelity. It wasn't just an affair with my daughter-in-law. This was a plan that involved my absence, perhaps my ruin, or worse. I looked around the room with new eyes. The open suitcases on the bed now seemed like part of a cruel stage play. The trip I had waited for, planned for months, had become the perfect alibi for them. Then I realized something that made me shudder. My daughter-in-law's message didn't say when she leaves, it said when the old woman leaves. It wasn't about me going to the airport, it was about me leaving their lives. I took a deep breath. If I had simply left that night, I would have known nothing, and perhaps I would have never known anything again. I carefully picked up my husband's phone again. I opened his messages. There were many recent exchanges between them. Pet names, laughter, scheduling. It wasn't just a hidden affair. They had been together for a long time. I found a message that chilled me even more. The documents are ready. As soon as she travels, we'll sort everything out. Sort everything out. What? Everything. I closed my eyes for a moment. Images from the past flashed through my mind. Me working tirelessly, helping to pay for our son's college, supporting their marriage, welcoming my daughter-in-law into my own home when they needed it. How many times had I served that young woman at my table? How many times had I trusted her as if she were my own daughter? Now it was clear I was nothing more than an obstacle. I heard footsteps in the hallway again. My husband called out, "Honey, are you ready?" My voice barely came out. "Just finishing up." "I'm heading out to grab something quickly at the store," he said. "I'll wait for you so we can go to the airport after." The store. I knew he was going to alert her. As soon as I heard the front door close, my legs gave out. I sat on the floor of the bedroom feeling a mix of panic, shame, and clarity. It all made sense now. The exchanged glances, the conversations that stopped when I walked in, the forced smiles. I had to act, but I had to act in silence. I got up, closed my suitcase, but not to travel. I took out my passport, hid my important documents in my purse, grabbed cash, cards, and the backup phone I rarely used. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet. I just knew one thing. I would not be leaving the house that day, and they could never know it. I went back near the wardrobe and stood there, lying in wait, waiting for the next move in this dirty game I had just discovered. Minutes later, I heard my husband's phone vibrate outside. The vibration was accompanied by the notification sound I would never forget. "When the old woman leaves, let me know." Now he would reply. And my hell was officially just beginning. I went back inside the wardrobe, my heart pounding, smelling the stuffy scent of old clothes mixed with my own fear. My body was still trembling, but now there was something new running through me. A sharp, living, electric suspicion. I was no longer just a cheated wife. I was a woman who had just instinctively escaped a plan I didn't even fully understand yet. A few minutes later, I heard the gate open again. My husband was back sooner than I expected. The sound of his footsteps crossed the hall, approached the bedroom, and then the door opened. Through the narrow gap between the clothes, I could only see fragments of the scene, as if I were watching it all through a scar in the world. He came in hurriedly, speaking on the phone in a low voice. "I've given the signal," he murmured. "Is she still getting ready?" "Yes." She'll be leaving in a few minutes. My stomach sank. He hung up and started pacing. He ran his hands through his hair, sat on the edge of the bed, then stood up again. He seemed nervous, but not regretful. And then the door opened again. The scent of her perfume entered the room before the sound did. A perfume that was too sweet, too heavy. The same one she wore to Sunday lunches, the same one I had complimented so many times, never imagining that scent would also be part of my ruin. She entered without ceremony. "Is she gone?" she asked. "Not yet," he replied. "Almost." She closed the door behind her and approached the bed, sitting next to him like someone who already felt she owned the space. "We need to speed this up," she said. "I can't wait forever." I know. He sighed. "But everything has to look natural." She laughed, a short, humorless laugh. "Natural? After everything we've already done, you're still worried about that?" He didn't answer. I could only see parts of their bodies, their hands, their feet, the outlines of their faces cut by the partial darkness. But I heard every word with a clarity that hurt my bones. "The lawyer will be waiting tomorrow," she said. "As soon as she's out of the country, we start the process. Selling the house, accessing the accounts, everything." "And if someone suspects?" he asked. "No one will suspect," she replied coldly. "The family thinks she's traveling. So do the neighbors. And by the time they hear from her again, it'll be too late." My blood turned to ice in my veins. "Too late for what?" he murmured. There was a short, dense silence, full of something unsaid. "For her to come back," my daughter-in-law answered. The room seemed to spin around me. She opened her purse and took out something small, metallic, a case, the same kind of case I'd seen years before when she worked in a health-related field. She opened it carefully. "It's all here," she said. "We can't fail." "You're going too far," he whispered, almost pleading. "Too far is being poor your whole life," she shot back dryly. "Too far is waiting for a death that might need a little help." The sentence came out too clean, too direct. My vision went dark for a second. I had to bite my own arm to keep from groaning in there. "Are you sure this will look like an accident?" he asked. "Absolutely," she replied. "In a few days, at most." A few days! My heart beat so hard I was sure they could hear it. She stood up, walked around the room, touched a few things on the dresser, as if already rehearsing her ownership of the space. "Have you decided what you're going to say when they call asking about her?" she asked. "That she extended her trip," he replied. "That she decided to stay abroad a little longer." "Perfect," she smiled. "It's always been easy to use you." He didn't react. I had never seen my husband like that, submissive, small. A man I had believed for years to be my partner was now nothing more than a nervous accomplice. "What if she changes her mind and doesn't travel today?" he ventured. She paused for a second. "Then we improvise." Improvise. That word shot through me like a pure threat. She approached him, ran a hand over his face in an intimate gesture that burned my eyes from the inside. "You promised," she said. "You promised you'd go all the way this time." He lowered his head. "I know." "Then don't get weak now." They kissed. There, inside that wardrobe, squeezed between clothes that no longer meant anything, I watched the final collapse of my life. It wasn't just a husband's betrayal. It was a family's betrayal, a conspiracy, the beginning of something they already considered finished. "I'll wait outside," she said. "Let me know as soon as she leaves." "I will." She opened the door. Before leaving, she turned to him and said something that still echoes inside me today. "The old woman can't get in the way of our plans." The door closed. My husband was left alone in the room, breathing deeply, running his hands over his face, like someone trying to convince himself of something irreversible. I saw his back, the same posture I had known for decades, only now I knew. That man no longer existed for me. He took out his phone, typed quickly, and put it in his pocket. I knew in that instant that the message to her had been sent. She's still here, I thought. But they believed I would leave. I stayed in the dark for a few more minutes, paralyzed, waiting for him to leave. When I finally heard his footsteps move away and the bedroom door close, I slipped out of the wardrobe, like someone being born again, weak, trembling, but alive. I looked in the mirror. My face looked like another woman's, pale, aged 5 years in a few minutes. Now I was sure. They weren't just interested in my money. They were ready to erase me. My husband believed I would travel. My daughter-in-law believed that in a few days I would cease to exist forever. What they didn't know was that I was here, hiding, breathing, hearing everything, and for the first time, understanding that perhaps the suitcase I had packed hours before wasn't for a trip, but for an escape, or for a war. I sat on the edge of the bed with weak legs, holding back tears so I wouldn't make a sound. I needed to think. I needed to act. I needed to survive. Because now I had seen too much. And those who see too much either die or fight back. I sat on the edge of the bed for long minutes after the bedroom door closed behind him. The silence that remained wasn't peace. It was a vacuum. A hole torn open in my chest. I was no longer trembling just from fear, but from a kind of pain that has no name. The kind that's born when your entire memory has to be re-examined under a new light. The man I married didn't exist. That thought hammered inside my head as I looked at the packed suitcases. Every folded piece of clothing seemed like a cruel irony. I had spent my whole life preparing to care, to share, to support a family, and suddenly I realized I had built it all on a false foundation. I met my husband when I was 26. I was a seamstress, he worked in sales. He came into my life with an easy smile, simple promises. A way about him that seemed to want to build something real. We didn't date for long. He was kind, attentive, protective. He wasn't a man of grand declarations, but he seemed steady. And back then, that's all I was looking for, steadiness. We married quickly, rented a small but clean house. We built everything slowly. I worked long hours. He traveled a lot. When our son Michael was born, I cried from exhaustion and joy at the same time. He held the baby in his arms and swore that nothing would ever be lacking for us. For many years, it seemed true. I took care of the house, our son, the bills, the food. He brought in the money, made the bigger decisions, handled bank matters, documents, investments. I always trusted him. I was never very interested in finances. I always thought we each had our role, and mine was to trust. Over time, I started to notice small cracks. Nothing too visible. He became more distant, more closed off. Some trips lasted longer than planned. Phone calls answered in the backyard. But I was never a suspicious woman. I always preferred to believe the versions that preserved my peace. When our son grew up, he became a hard-working, honest young man. I was proud of him, and when he introduced his future wife, I welcomed her like a daughter. Young, pretty, seemingly fragile. She came from a broken family, full of needs. I saw myself in her, which is perhaps why I opened my heart so wide. I helped with the wedding, gave them furniture, support, affection. When they went through hard times, I helped in silence. My husband agreed with everything, as long as I didn't touch the main accounts. "Let me handle that," he always said, and I let him. Today, looking back, I see that "let me handle that" was the first shackle. The years went by, and what I called stability slowly began to turn into dependence. My husband started to centralize everything. I no longer had direct access to the accounts. When I needed something significant, I'd ask, and he never said no, but he also never explained. It just seemed like organization to me. After my daughter-in-law definitively entered our lives, I felt something shift in the air. They became closer. He started taking too much interest in her affairs, defending her even when she was wrong. At family gatherings, I'd noticed strange glances exchanged, small, silent smiles. It bothered me, perhaps, but I pretended not to see. In your 60s, you don't want more conflict. You want rest. While I was resting, they were plotting. The signs were all there, and I either didn't see them or didn't want to. Now, sitting in that room, hiding in my own house, I realized the man I shared my life with wasn't just a cheater. He was an accomplice, an active accomplice. He wasn't being manipulated. He was participating. I remembered something he said months earlier when I told him excitedly about my trip overseas. "You really need to get away right now." At the time, I thought it was concern. Today, I understood. It was urgency. I picked up the photo album from the dresser drawer. I turned the pages with trembling fingers. Wedding, birth of our son, first house, parties, Christmases, birthdays. It all felt like a lie. Now, every frozen smile on paper hid secrets I had never suspected. My husband was smiling in every photo, a smile I no longer recognized. The truth hit with final force. He wasn't just cheating on me with my daughter-in-law. He was cheating on me in everything. Betraying my trust, betraying my history, betraying my very existence. I stood up with difficulty. My body ached as if I had been beaten from the inside. I went to the window carefully, pulling back just a sliver of the curtain. I saw my husband in the yard, talking on the phone, pacing. He was gesturing nervously, probably with her. "Calm down, it's almost all sorted out," I heard, muffled through the glass. Sorted out. They were already talking as if I were a problem about to be removed. I felt something transform inside me in that instant. It was no longer just fear. It was a kind of cold clarity. I could no longer treat this situation as an emotional betrayal. It was a crime in the making, and I was at the center of it. I went back to the bedroom, picked up the backup phone hidden in the back of a drawer, an old device almost no one knew I still kept. I turned it on. The battery still had a charge. That gave me a strange sense of relief. I then began to mentally review every detail of what I had heard, every phrase, every veiled threat, every plan mentioned so casually. I saw it with horrifying clarity. They were going to erase my existence, bit by bit, first socially, then financially, and if necessary. I swallowed hard, perhaps physically too. The packed suitcase in the corner of the room took on a new meaning. That suitcase wasn't meant to take me far away. It was proof that I could disappear from my own house for days without raising suspicion, without anyone noticing. I needed, instead, to disappear just enough for them to believe everything would go as planned, but not disappear for real. In that moment, I understood something essential. I would also have to pretend. Pretend everything was normal. Pretend I believed them. Pretend I was going on the trip. Pretend I was still predictable. This would be my survival. I sat on the bed again and cried in silence. Not a desperate cry, but a contained, dry, painful cry that seemed to flow directly from my soul. I cried for the love I thought I had lived. I cried for the son who was perhaps also being deceived. I cried for myself, for that 26-year-old woman who believed in the smile of a man who didn't exist. When the crying stopped, something in me stopped too. My innocence. Now I knew I was alone in that house, alone against two conspirators who already considered me out of the game. And from that moment on, every gesture of mine would have to be calculated, every word measured, every step planned, because I was surrounded by my own ghosts and by the traitors I myself had helped create. And yet, I was still breathing. And as long as I was breathing, they would not win so easily. The silence of that house took on a new weight after I understood I was already being buried alive. It was no longer just a home. It was the stage for a play in which I was the main character, destined to disappear in the final act. And I had to pretend I knew nothing. I waited for my husband to leave for good. I watched through the window as he got into his car and drove away. Only then did I move. Every step I took echoed as if someone could hear me, even in my absence. Fear now walked beside me, but so did clarity. I went straight to his office, a room I had always considered his exclusive territory. I never touched anything in there without permission. Too much respect, too much trust. This was the first time I had crossed that threshold with the full awareness that I had been deceived for decades. I sat in the leather swivel chair, feeling a strange chill as I occupied a place that had always been denied to me. I opened the drawers one by one. The first few contained trivial things, paid bills, manuals, nothing suspicious. In the third drawer, I found a blue folder. My name was written on the cover. My heart raced. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were copies of my ID, social security information, proof of residence, bank statements, life insurance contracts. In all of them, one detail made me gasp for air. I was no longer the sole person with power over them. There were registered powers of attorney authorizing my husband to manage my assets broadly. Powers of attorney I didn't remember signing. I kept digging. High-value insurance policies, recent dates, amounts I never imagined were in my name. The beneficiaries, my husband, and in some documents, my daughter-in-law. My daughter-in-law. I felt my legs weaken. I leaned on the desk. They weren't just planning my absence. They were already organizing my after. I flipped through the papers more carefully. I saw strange clauses, digitized signatures, technical terms I barely understood, but that screamed a cruel truth. While I was dreaming of my trip overseas, they were already dreaming of dividing my life. On the last page of the folder, I found a simple spreadsheet, printed on plain paper. On it, names of assets: house, 2 plots of land inherited from my parents, financial investments, retirement accounts, insurance. Next to each item were values, and further on, 2 columns: his share, her share. They were already dividing everything before I was even dead. My whole body shook. I took a deep breath and continued. I opened the office computer. I always thought I wouldn't know the password, but in a cruel twist of irony, it was our wedding date. It would have almost made me laugh if it didn't hurt so much. Inside the computer, I found emails exchanged between him, my daughter-in-law, and a lawyer. Cold, objective messages, talking about deadlines, documents, strategies for the prolonged absence of the holder. In one, I read something that chilled me even more. After the trip, it will be the ideal time to move forward, considering the family's emotional state. I also saw messages about the pre-sale of the house. They planned to say I had decided to live abroad. They even had real estate agents in mind. What shocked me most, however, was realizing how calmly all of this was being done, without rush, methodically, like a slow surgery designed to remove me from the center of my own life, without my noticing. The inheritance they were already dividing while I was alive wasn't just material. They were also portioning out my absence. I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered all the times I had trusted my husband with my signature without question. All the times I had let him handle everything. I had handed him the knife, and now I discovered it was pointed at me. I copied some documents with my phone, photographed the policies, the spreadsheets, the emails open on the screen. Each piece of evidence was a small anchor in a sea of betrayal. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of the gate again. My heart nearly leapt out of my mouth. I shut down the computer in a hurry, closed the drawer, put the folder back in its original place, and left the office almost at a run, trying to look like a woman just going to the kitchen for water. My husband came in with grocery bags in his hand. "Are you ready yet?" he asked, as if nothing existed beyond the mundane. "Almost," I replied. He smiled. "I'll put these away and come back to get you for the airport." The naturalness of that smile almost made me scream. I sat at the table, feigning fatigue. "This trip will do me good," I murmured. "Yes, it will," he replied, averting his gaze. He lied with the same confidence with which he breathed. As soon as he left again, I stood up slowly and went to the bedroom. I locked the door, sat on the bed, and looked again at my packed suitcase. Now it seemed like a silent weapon, part of the theater they believed they controlled. But I was starting to control something now, too. I began to search every corner of the room for more clues. In the back of the sock drawer, I found an envelope with my daughter-in-law's name on it. Inside were copies of my documents and a preliminary purchase agreement for a luxury vehicle in her name. The date was for a few days after my supposed trip. They had plans, big plans, and I was part of them only as an absence. It was then that I understood something terrible. To them, I was already dead. All that remained was to make it official. The trip was my farewell without a funeral. My heart started to beat too hard in my chest. I paced the room trying to organize my thoughts. I needed help. I couldn't face this alone. But who could I trust? My son? I didn't know to what extent he was involved. A lawyer? The police? If I reported it now, they could deny everything, destroy evidence, run away. No. I needed more concrete proof. I needed them to feel absolutely safe. Only then would they make mistakes big enough to be destroyed. I took a deep breath and made a decision that sent shivers down my spine. I would pretend until the very end. I would let them believe in my trip. I would let them think everything was under control. Meanwhile, I would gather every piece of evidence, every trace, every document, and when the time was right, I would return from the dead. I spent the entire afternoon feigning normalcy. I ate little for lunch, made coffee, engaged in small talk. When my husband took me to the airport that night, I took only a small suitcase, as planned. In the car, he seemed nervous, talked too much, avoided my eyes in the rearview mirror. "You'll call when you get there?" he asked. "Of course," I replied. We arrived at the airport parking lot. He helped me with the suitcase, hugged me tightly. "Everything will be fine," he said. I smiled on the outside. On the inside, I was saying, "Will it really?" I walked into the terminal, walked a few yards, and sat on a bench where he could no longer see me. I waited until I was sure he was gone. Then I got up, turned around, and left through a different side door. I hailed a cab. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. I stared ahead, my eyes burning. Away from here, but not too far. The taxi pulled away. And that night, officially, the woman they believed had traveled ceased to exist for the world. But the woman they never imagined existed had just been born. As the taxi moved through the city that night, I felt like I was leaving behind not just my house, but the woman I had been for decades. The driver was saying something about the traffic, but I barely heard him. My mind was stuck on the image of my husband leaving me in the airport terminal, believing I would cross the ocean that very night, when in reality, I was just crossing an invisible wall between naivety and survival. I asked the taxi to stop 3 blocks from my own house. I couldn't risk being seen. I walked in the shadows, feeling like a stranger in the neighborhood where I had lived for so many years. I entered through a small side gate that almost no one used, and that I myself had had built years ago. I locked it behind me. The silence of the house was absolute. I was now a ghost in my own home. I spent the first few days hidden in the storage room at the back of the house, a small, windowless room where old tools, old suitcases, and boxes of memories were kept. I brought only a thin mattress, water, some crackers, my backup phone, and a portable charger. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would sneak out to use the bathroom, prepare something quick to eat, and gather small clues about what they were up to. And they talked with a frightening naturalness. On the second night, I heard my husband on the phone in the living room. She arrived safely, Sent a message. He lied. She's enchanted with the hotel. And my daughter-in-law replied with a low laugh. Great. So we're free for now. Free? The word tore through me. The next day, I heard them talking in the kitchen while I, hidden behind the slightly ajar door of the storage room, listened to every sentence as if hearing the verdict of my own life. The lawyer has scheduled it for Friday, my husband said. Perfect, she replied. Let's speed everything up before she decides to come back. She won't notice a thing. She's always been slow with this stuff. She won't even have time to notice, she retorted. My stomach churned, but my mind noted everything. I recorded several of these conversations with the phone hidden in my robe pocket when I silently passed through the hallway at night. They started having visitors. A real estate agent, a bank manager, a man in a dark suit I didn't know. They would sit in the living room, talk in low voices, laugh, point at documents, at my house. My house. Every laugh of theirs was like an invisible slap. I started discreetly going through the trash every pre-dawn morning. I found shredded papers of sales proposals, preliminary contracts, copies of my documents. Everything was already in motion. They were no longer just planning. They were executing. It was then that I understood with brutal clarity. They weren't just interested in my money. They wanted to erase any trace of me. One morning, I heard something that almost made me lose control. They were in the living room, drinking wine. And when she dies over there, my daughter-in-law asked, have we planned what we're going to say? That it was a heart attack during the trip, my husband replied. I've already prepared everything. Insurance, body transport, all that. She applauded slowly. Perfect. A mother's grieving widow abroad, with a ready inheritance to collect. Mother's widow? I had to bite my hand to keep from screaming, but I stayed there, silent, surviving, observing everything. But before we continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in their place. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next will give you chills. After that point, everything became even more dangerous. They started sleeping together in my bed. The bed where I had slept for over 40 years with that man. The bed where I had built intimacy, trust, complicity, was now being used as the stage for the most sickening betrayal. I would hear muffled laughter, whispered conversations, plans being made under the same roof that still hid me. One night, my husband said something that froze me. We need to get rid of her things. I've already started, my daughter-in-law replied. I've set aside clothes for donation. The valuables stay. They were already dividing my memories as if they were a physical inheritance. On another night, I heard my husband open the office cabinet. Where are her old documents? I've destroyed almost everything, she answered. What matters is already digitized. Almost everything. That meant my proof was still partly alive. I started leaving the storage room more often, always in the dead of night. I searched cabinets, drawers, boxes, photographing everything I could with the backup phone and hiding the files in an email only I had access to. Every contract, every signature, every false power of attorney registered on their computer. During one of these searches, I found something that made my legs give out. A blank death certificate draft, already with my name on it. The cause of death field was empty. Still, for the first time, I felt that maybe I wasn't just being robbed. Maybe I was being officially prepared to die. I saved those images with trembling hands. That same night, as I was silently leaving the living room, I crossed a shadow in the hallway, my daughter-in-law. We stood face to face for an endless second, separated only by 10 feet of distance and the darkness. My heart nearly stopped. She looked towards me, but my body was completely covered by a dark cloth I always wore. I looked like just another outline. Who's there? She asked. I held my breath. My husband called from the living room. What is it? Nothing, she replied. Must have been the wind. She went back. I almost fainted from fear. In that moment, I understood that I couldn't stay in that house much longer. The risk was growing. They were becoming more and more confident. And when people like that get too confident, they become careless. But they also become more lethal. It was then that I made the most difficult decision of my life. I had to leave the house without them knowing, and I needed someone from the outside, someone they would never suspect was on my side. The next morning, when they left together to handle paperwork, I escaped through the back door, carrying only a small backpack. I went straight to the house of an old friend, Margaret, the only one my husband had never liked. When I knocked on her door, weak, haggard, she barely recognized me. "My God, weren't you overseas?" I looked at her with eyes full of tears. "I didn't leave my life. I fled from it." And then, for the first time since it all began, I told someone everything. Every detail, every plan, every word I had heard between the walls of my own home. And as I spoke, I realized something terrible and liberating at the same time. The war was no longer silent. Now it had a witness. My friend Margaret's house smelled of old coffee and coconut soap. A simple, honest smell, a smell that hid nothing. I sat in a kitchen chair while she looked at me like someone staring at a ghost who had returned from her own funeral. My hands were shaking so much she had to hold my cup so I wouldn't drop it. "You need to rest," she said. "You look like you've been through hell." I had, but that wasn't the first one. As I struggled to breathe, trying to organize the most recent events, something even older began to fall on me with the weight of an avalanche. The memory of everything I had done for that woman who was now planning my social death. And perhaps more than that. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, had come into my life as a girl hurt by the world. She was just over 20 when she met my son. She came from a broken home, an alcoholic father, an absent mother, scattered siblings. When he brought her for lunch for the first time, I saw in her eyes a silent plea for acceptance, and I accepted her, body and soul. I helped her with clothes when she arrived with just one suitcase. I helped with food, with a doctor's appointment, with enrollment in a technical course. When she said she wanted to change her life, I stood up for her. I defended her when she fought with my son, defended her when she made mistakes, defended her when she lied, because to me, she was more than a daughter-in-law. She was a daughter that life hadn't given me. I remember one specific day years ago when a neighbor came to tell me she had heard rumors about her, that she had been involved with married men before meeting my son. I nearly fought with the woman at the building's entrance. I went home indignant and told Chloe everything, saying that people were cruel and envious. She cried in my arms that day. Today I understand what those tears really meant. When she got pregnant with my grandson, I was the one who paid for a large part of the baby supplies. I was the one who accompanied her to the doctor when my son was working. I was the one who spent the first night in the hospital while she moaned in pain and fear, holding my hand tightly. And in that moment, I truly believed I had gained another daughter. Now, hiding from my own home, I realized I hadn't raised a daughter, but a strategist. My friend listened to me in silence as I told her everything. The messages, the wardrobe, the fake trip, what I had heard between the walls. When I finished, she put her hands to her face. "This is worse than betrayal," Margaret said. "This is planned destruction." "And I brought that woman into my house," I replied, my voice breaking. "I defended her from everyone and everything." "People like that feed on exactly that," she said, "on other people's trust." I spent that afternoon at her house, hidden from the world, for the first time in days. I slept for a few consecutive hours. It was a heavy, tormented sleep, filled with confusing dreams. I dreamed of Chloe as a child sitting at my table. Then I saw her as an adult, shredding my documents. I woke up in a cold sweat. When I awoke, I found messages on my backup phone. My friend had used an old tablet to access the family's social media. It made my blood run cold. My husband had posted an old photo from the airport with a triumphant caption, "A difficult departure, but it's for her own good. Miss you." My daughter-in-law had commented with a heart emoji. They were staging my existence for the world. It was official. Socially, I was already gone. It was then that my friend said something that would change everything. "You need to see a lawyer today." "And the police?" I asked. "No, not yet. First, we need to protect you legally. If they have power of attorney, we need to block them before they can do more damage." The plan began to form right there. I left her house that night, wearing borrowed clothes, my hair tied up under a scarf, sunglasses on even in the dark. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. Maybe that was a good thing. I needed to stop being who I was to survive who they planned to destroy. On the way to the lawyer's office she recommended, I saw my reflection in the window of a closed shop, a 64-year-old woman hunched over, hiding, running from her own last name, and all because of someone I had called a daughter. The lawyer was a serious, calm man with precise speech. I showed him the photos of the documents, the messages, the partial recordings. As I went on, his face grew grim. "They have already crossed the line of attempted fraud," he said. "We're talking about conspiracy for property fraud in an advanced stage, and there are signs of preparation for identity theft." "And what about me?" I asked. "Am I safe?" He hesitated for a second. "Legally, yes. Physically, we don't yet know how far they are willing to go." I signed a new power of attorney right there, now in favor of the lawyer, revoking all previous ones. He immediately filed to block any suspicious transactions. The net was beginning to close. When I returned to my friend's house, it was already dawn. My backup phone vibrated with a new notification that made me hold my breath. A message from my daughter-in-law, sent to the entire family group chat. She decided to extend her trip. She's in love with life abroad. She'll be moving for good soon. They were already preparing for my permanent exile. I felt something rise inside me that wasn't just pain. It was indignation, contained fury, a strength I never knew I had. "She thinks she's won?" I murmured. My friend squeezed my hand. "She hasn't won. She just thinks you can't come back anymore." I stared into space for a few seconds, then replied with something that surprised me. "But I'm not coming back the way they expect." That night, I relived every moment I had defended that woman. Every dollar lent, every plate served at the table, every tear wiped away. And something became clear. My kindness had been the perfect soil where her ambition took root. I had been her shield. Now I needed to be a sword. I picked up the phone and, for the first time since I had fled, sent a message to my daughter-in-law's number. Just 2 words. "Missing you." She replied almost immediately with a smiling emoji and a heart. My stomach turned, but I smiled too, because from that moment on, I was no longer just the deceived woman. I was the woman who was now playing in the dark, while they played, convinced I was already off the board. I woke up before sunrise on my friend's couch, an anguish pressing on my chest. The world was still quiet, but inside me, everything was screaming. I carefully picked up the backup phone as if it might explode in my hands. There were dozens of new messages in the family group chat from aunts, cousins, acquaintances, all of them talking about me as if I were too far away to reply. "May God be with her in this new chapter. May she be very happy abroad. We'll miss her at our get-togethers." They were saying goodbye to me as if to someone who had already departed forever. And then I saw it. My husband had posted an old photo of me on social media, a picture from Christmas 3 years earlier where I was smiling next to the tree. In the caption, he wrote, "When you start missing someone before they've even said goodbye." My stomach churned. My daughter-in-law commented right below, "Enjoy your new life." She deserves it. They were creating a version of my story in which I had simply chosen to disappear. A clean choice, with no victims, no suspicion. To everyone else, I had traveled of my own free will. To them, I had exited the stage, buried alive socially. My friend sat next to me and read the messages in silence. When she finished, she took a deep breath. "They are erasing you without getting their hands dirty." "It's worse," I replied. "They're making the whole world believe I consented to it." That same morning, I received a call from my son. His name appeared on the screen, and my hands began to tremble. It was the call I dreaded most. "Mom?" His voice came through, distant, confused. "Are you really overseas?" It took me 2 eternal seconds to answer. "I'm traveling, my son," I lied, a lie that cut me like a knife. "Dad said you were thinking of staying for good. Is that true?" "I don't know yet. It's all very new." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "That's strange. You didn't say anything to me before." "It was a last-minute decision," I replied, my throat burning. "I wanted some time to think alone." He sighed. "We miss you here. The kids asked about you yesterday." I closed my eyes, feeling the pain rise like a fire. "Tell them I'll send gifts," I murmured. If I had told the truth in that moment, everything would have crumbled before its time. After I hung up, my legs gave out. I sat on the kitchen floor, unable to hold back the tears. I was being buried in front of my own son, with digital flowers, polite goodbyes, and a perfectly crafted lie. That afternoon, my friend brought new information. A mutual neighbor had called her by mistake, thinking I was the intended recipient. "Your husband announced he's selling the house," my friend said. "He said you want to start a new life abroad." The floor seemed to disappear from under me. "Selling my house while I'm still alive." "Yes, and viewings are already scheduled." Now it was clear. They weren't just burying me symbolically, they were starting the final plunder. I picked up the backup phone and discreetly logged into my banking app, using the credentials that still worked. I saw transactions I didn't recognize. Small transfers, like tests. The machine was already in motion. "They're cleaning everything out, little by little," I whispered. "We need to act fast," my friend said. "They're gaining social and financial ground." "Not yet," I replied, with a calmness that surprised me. "They still need me to be officially dead. And that hasn't happened." She looked at me in silence. That night, I received a message from my husband on my main phone, the one I had supposedly taken with me on the trip. "Miss you. Call me when you can." The audacity almost made me laugh. I replied simply, "When I can." It was enough to keep the charade alive. Shortly after, I saw a new photo in the family group chat. My husband and my daughter-in-law sitting in my living room, drinking wine, smiling. In the background, I recognized my paintings, my curtains, my sofa. The caption read, "Family dinner. The house feels empty without her." Empty. My house was full of absence, but also full of proof. It was in the middle of that night that everything became even clearer. My friend, through an acquaintance at the registrar's office, managed to access a newly filed request. My husband had initiated an update to the registration of my assets, claiming my permanent residence abroad. They were formalizing my erasure. I spent hours staring at that information, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee in my hands. At 64 years old, I was discovering that it wasn't enough to survive betrayals. You had to survive the versions of yourself created by others. The next morning, I received another call, this time from a distant cousin. "I heard you moved away for good. Is it true?" "I haven't moved away for good," I replied, my voice firm. "I'm just away for now." She laughed, relieved. "That's good to hear. The way your husband talked, it sounded so final." The word final echoed inside me like a warning. That same afternoon, the lawyer called me. "Your husband has initiated the sale of the house. he said directly. But we've managed to place a temporary block based on the revocation of the power of attorney. He doesn't know that yet. My heart sped up. He'll find out soon, and when he does, he'll panic. I closed my eyes. That's what I need, I murmured. Their mistake. I hung up the phone with the certainty that the game was beginning to turn, but at the same time, a new fear coursed through me. The more cornered they became, the more dangerous they would be. That night, I dreamed I was walking through my own funeral. People were whispering, crying, but no one saw me. I would touch their shoulders, scream, and they would all pass through me as if I were smoke. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding. I didn't want to be a ghost. I wanted to return as living proof. 2 days later, my friend came into the house, breathless, phone in hand. "Your daughter-in-law gave an interview," she said, "to an acquaintance from church. She said you're very happy over there and might never come back." I clenched my fists. They're preparing the world for my permanent absence. "You need to reappear before they cement this lie," my friend said seriously. "Not yet," I answered. "It's not time yet." That night, I walked to the window and watched the quiet street. People passed by, their lives going on, ignorant of the fact that mine was being erased in real time. I took a deep breath. That day, they buried me without a coffin, without a funeral, without any dirt. They buried me in posts, messages, versions, and documents, but I was alive. And sometimes the dead come back. And when they do, they change everything. After the day they buried me alive, something inside me ceased to exist. I was no longer just a woman in hiding. I had become a ghost, invisible to the world, but aware of every move made by those who believed I had already departed forever. I began to live in a strange state between existing and not existing. I couldn't call almost anyone, couldn't go out during the day, couldn't leave a trace. My name was being used out there in versions that were not mine. Meanwhile, I breathed in silence inside my friend's house, as if my breath itself were a crime. In the first few days, I still felt ashamed of myself, ashamed of hiding, ashamed of depending on someone, ashamed of having been deceived for so long. But shame was soon swallowed by the oldest instinct of all: survival. My routine became simple and tense. I would wake up early, even before my friend got up. I would wash the dishes from the night before to avoid being seen. I would make the bed where I slept on the sofa. I spent hours in silence, listening only to the ticking of the kitchen clock. In the afternoon, I helped with small chores around the house. At night, I would retreat back into myself. I had become an expert at existing without being noticed. Every now and then, I would go out hooded, in loose clothes and sunglasses, just to breathe the street air. I looked at shop windows, saw people walking briskly, couples arguing, children running. Life was going on as normal for everyone. Only mine was on hold. My husband continued to post photos. Old photos with me, photos of him with my son, photos with my smiling daughter-in-law, always with captions that hinted at longing, sacrifice, love. The performance was perfect. No one suspected a thing. With each new post, I felt as if pieces of my identity were being stolen. They spoke for me, decided for me, told my story as if I could no longer interfere. But I did interfere, from my hiding place. I followed every step. Thanks to an acquaintance of my friend at the bank, I received discreet information about strange transactions, small test amounts, transfers declined by the block the lawyer had managed to secure. I knew that soon they would realize something wasn't working as planned, and that moment arrived on a rainy morning. My friend walked into the kitchen with her phone in her hand, pale. "He tried to move a large sum from your retirement account," she said. The bank denied it. My heart raced. He knows something is wrong now. That same night, I received several messages from my husband. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Please, call me. I ignored them all. A little later, a message from my daughter-in-law. Something went wrong with your accounts. Did you forget a password? I smiled to myself in the silence of the room. They were starting to realize the dead woman still had a pulse. In the following days, the atmosphere at their house changed. From the indirect reports I received, they were fighting frequently. The real estate agent stopped coming by. Their lawyer began to return calls with more caution. The net was closing in slowly. Meanwhile, I was getting stronger. I started eating better, sleeping more regularly. I began to walk for a few minutes every morning in my friend's backyard, feeling the sun warm my bones. My body was starting to move from a state of pure survival to something closer to resistance. The lawyer called me for a discreet meeting at a time when almost no one was in the building. I entered through the back with my face partially covered. In that cold room, he laid out a complete map of the situation. Your husband has already attempted 3 large transactions, he said. All were blocked. He's pressuring the bank, claiming you're not responding. And what does he say about me? I asked. That you're ill, that you're weak, that he's handling things for you. I closed my eyes. Always the same role. The man who takes care of the fragile woman. How long can I remain officially absent? I asked. He took a deep breath. Legally speaking, not for much longer without raising suspicion with official agencies. They will want confirmation of life, direct contact. That set off an alarm inside me. So I need to reappear, but not completely yet. Exactly, he replied. A controlled sign of life. Enough to keep them nervous. Not enough to close the investigation. The strategy began to take a new shape. I shouldn't return as the deceived woman who had been buried by others. I needed to return as a living threat. That same week, I sent a short message to my husband using my main phone. My trip is going to take longer than I thought. Don't touch anything, he replied in seconds. Why? What's happening? I didn't answer. I sent another message just to my daughter-in-law. I've been thinking a lot about you all. She read it and didn't reply for hours. For the first time, the silence came from her side. That night, I barely slept. I lay there staring at the dark ceiling, thinking about everything I had lost and everything that could still happen. I was no longer sure if the biggest danger was financial. Now I feared that, realizing they were being blocked, they might try something more direct. My friend felt this fear too. They could get aggressive, she said. People like that don't accept losing what they think is already theirs. I know, I replied, but now I have nowhere left to retreat. In the following days, indirect messages started to arrive through relatives. Disguised questions, suspicious concerns, too much curiosity. All sent on their orders. I knew it. They were trying to find out where I was, how I was, if I was even really still alive. I was still a ghost, but now a ghost breathing down the necks of the living. It was then that I received the most dangerous call of all, from my husband himself. I let it ring several times. I only answered when I felt I had to listen. "Where are you?" he asked bluntly, his voice tense. "Far away," I replied. "You need to come back. Things are getting complicated here." I smiled, even knowing he couldn't see it. "Are they really?" I asked. He was silent for a few seconds. "They are." "Then maybe you should wait," I replied. Just like I waited for so many years. I hung up before he could say anything else. My hand was trembling. In that moment, I understood with clarity. The game had turned. Now they knew I wasn't off the board. They just didn't know where I was, or when I would step back into the open field. I looked at my friend, who was watching me in silence. "They're scared," I murmured. "Good," she replied. "That means they haven't finished you yet." That night, I sat on the porch and watched the moon slowly cross the cloudy sky. For the first time since everything began, I felt something beyond terror and pain. I felt a strange kind of power. I was the woman they buried before death. I was the woman they believed they had erased. But now I was also the woman who watched them from the darkness. And the dead, when they return different. I chose the morning the real estate agent was scheduled to return to my house to show the property to potential buyers. I knew this from a message my daughter-in-law herself had sent to a neighbor, proud of how quickly everything was moving. Nothing could be more symbolic. They were selling my house while I was still breathing. That was the day I decided to reappear. I dressed simply, but with dignity. I tied my hair back, put on a touch of lipstick, and set my eyes with a firmness I barely recognized in myself. The lawyer was waiting for me 2 blocks away, along with a court officer and 2 plainclothes police officers. I would not set foot in that house alone. As the car turned the corner, I saw the gate was open. The agent's car was parked out front. There were voices inside the living room, laughter, the atmosphere of a negotiation well underway. I took a deep breath. My heart was beating like a war drum. I got out of the car. I walked through the gate of the house where I had lived for over 40 years, as if entering a stage set taken over by strangers. The living room was full. My husband was talking animatedly with an interested couple. My daughter-in-law was serving coffee, smiling like the perfect hostess. When I took 2 steps inside, time seemed to stop. "Good morning," I said, my voice loud. The coffee cups froze in midair. The agent went pale. The couple stood up, startled. My husband dropped the contract on the floor. My daughter-in-law brought a hand to her mouth as if she had seen a ghost. "But you," he stammered. "I'm alive," I completed, "contrary to what you planned." The lawyer entered right behind me, followed by the court officer. "The property is not for sale," the lawyer stated. "Any attempt at negotiation is legally void." My daughter-in-law started to cry, but they were empty, theatrical tears. "This is a misunderstanding, isn't it?" I replied, looking directly into her eyes. "I heard everything, I saw everything, and I recorded everything." My husband tried to approach me. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "I understand that you buried me alive, but you did a poor job of it." A police officer stepped forward. "We have a warrant to collect documents and computers." The house they already considered theirs was filled with official voices, with folders, with legal orders. My daughter-in-law started screaming. My husband sat down on the sofa, defeated, his face in his hands. I looked around the room, touched the edge of the table, breathed the air of the house that was mine. "You should have waited for me to actually die," I said, my voice firm, because as long as I was breathing, this was still mine. My daughter-in-law collapsed into sobs. My husband wouldn't even look at me anymore. I walked out of that house not as a fugitive, but as the owner. But I knew this wasn't the final punishment. It was only the beginning of their fall. What came after my return was a whirlwind that swept away all the lies they had built. In a few days, the investigation progressed more than I had imagined. The evidence I had gathered, combined with the documents found in my house, clearly outlined the scheme they had set up to erase me while I was still breathing. My husband began to be treated as a suspect of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. My daughter-in-law as an accomplice. The accounts were frozen, the powers of attorney nullified. Their lawyer, who had once seemed so confident, no longer answered their calls. I watched it all unfold with a strange mix of pain and relief. Pain, for seeing what I once called a family crumble. Relief, for knowing that finally I was no longer trapped in that web. The final confrontation happened on a quiet morning. I was called in to give a statement. As I entered the room at the police station, I saw them both sitting on opposite sides. My husband seemed smaller, older, defeated. My daughter-in-law maintained her cold gaze, but there was something broken there too. "Why did you do it?" I asked one last time. Not as an accuser, but as a wounded woman. He cried. She did not. Because you both thought I was already dead. I finished for them, and the dead don't fight back. The process was swift. The evidence was too strong. They tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but everything was documented. The messages, the attempted sales, the bank transactions, the plan to turn me into a permanent absence. When the final decision came down, I no longer felt hatred. I just felt a deep exhaustion and a strange peace. They lost the right to manage anything connected to me. They lost access to my assets. They lost the heroic version they had created of themselves. And most importantly, they lost the control they thought they had over my life. I left the police station alone, walking slowly under the weak morning sun. I took a deep breath. The air felt different, lighter. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had stopped being a silent victim. I went back to my house, the same house they had tried to sell in my absence. I ran my hand along the walls, the sofa, the table. Everything was in its place, except for me. The woman I was before no longer existed. I had been betrayed as a wife, erased as a person, used as an obstacle, but I survived. They thought I would die on my trip. What died was their lie. Today, at 64, I am starting over. Not from scratch, but from the most difficult place, from within myself. I don't need to run anymore. I don't need to hide. I don't need to pretend. I didn't die. I got my revenge by living. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story all the way to the end? What would you do in my place? Write it here in the comments and also tell me which city you're watching from. I read them all with great care. Leave a like to show me you follow and support this kind of story. Subscribe to the channel to keep listening to powerful, real, and transformative narratives. Sometimes a story like this isn't just a tale, it's a warning.